Hey everyone, welcome to Base 10 Montessori. My name is Teresa, and today I wanted to go over part 3 of the language development series that I've been working on. We've already gone over part 1, which covered how language develops, and then we covered part 2, which had to do with the research that I did, and also talks about the key predictors for success, especially in that 0 to 6 age group. And now part 3, I'm going to talk a lot more about activities. Now, these aren't going to be the lesson demonstrations just yet. This is just going to be the lists and the categories of lessons that you can do at home or in your classroom. And then after I get through with this series, I'm going to go more into the individual lesson presentations. So today we're going to talk about 3 different age groups for activities. And the first group is going to be 2.5 years old. We're going to break it down into the 2.5-year-old age group, the 4-year-old age group, and then the 5-year-old age group. So when you get into the 2.5-year-old age group, 2.5 to let's say 4, that period of development right there, we're going to start out with oral language development. And so this can be as simple as telling stories, having conversational experiences, a lot of the circle times that people like to do in preschool and kindergarten. This is a great time to do that, as well as also give a lot of enrichment of vocabulary. Now, how do you do that? How do you give a formal enrichment of vocabulary lesson? Well, in Montessori, we do that with a 3-period lesson. Now, I do have a video on the 3-period lesson if you want to look on my channel. I'll also try and leave the link below in the video so you can link to that down below. But what we do with the 3-period lesson is we might take 3 objects that maybe the child doesn't know the words to. Maybe there's some unfamiliar objects in the room. So I'll pick 3 of them and I'll simply tell the child the words for each thing. We're going to spend a lot of time on the first and second part of the 3-period lesson of introducing the name of the material, the name of the object, and then just playing association games with it. And then you can also do the same thing with classified cards, and you can introduce vocabulary through pictures. Now, when we're doing classified cards for just language enrichment, just for learning words, just use the picture. You don't have to use the label or the control card. So that is part of oral language development. And then we also can play different games at the 2.5 to 3-year-old age group. Now for phonemic and phonological awareness development, we want to play I Spy. And when we start this game, we're only going to do the beginning sounds. As the child gets older, we'll get into the ending sounds and the middle sounds, but just to begin with, we're going to focus on those beginning sounds. Now, another thing that can really help the phonemic and phonological awareness are syllable games, rhyming games, poems, and songs. This helps with phonological awareness. So rhyming is part of phonological awareness, and they're really easy to do. Like hickety pickety is a really fun rhyme to do. And that helps a child understand what syllables are. And then you can also sing the song Down by the Bay. And Down by the Bay is a really fun song to sing where the child has to kind of think on his feet and start playing around with that idea of rhyming. Well, what rhymes with pig? Oh, it's jig, right? So they can think of different rhyming words in the song Down by the Bay. Now there's also a little rhyming game that I like to play called Willoughby Wallaby, and that's another thing that you can work on with rhyming different names and see if the child can figure out, well, what am I rhyming here? And you're just changing one little phonemic sound in a name, like Willoughby Wallaby Woo, an elephant sat on you. Willoughby Wallaby Wake, an elephant sat on Mike. So just little different games that you can play really help the child hear the different sounds in a word, helps them hear the different syllables, and it also helps them with rhyming. And children who have difficulty with the rhyming, with the phonemic awareness, do tend to have more difficulty learning to read. And then as the child gets just a little bit older, we're going to start working on phonics. Usually I start this between 3 and 3.5 years old in my classroom, and I do start this with cursive letters and not the print letters, because in Montessori we write in cursive and we read in print. So when we go through our phonics, we're going to introduce the most common sounds first. So we're going to go through the short vowel sounds are the ones that we're going to introduce. We're not going to do long vowel sounds. We're not going to do letter names. We're going to introduce the sound, and we're going to introduce the short vowel sounds. And we're going to do this again with a 3-period lesson. So I'll take 3 letters at a time, and I'll introduce them. I'll introduce the sound, and the child is going to trace and say the letter names. Now, what order should you do for introducing phonics? Well, everybody has an opinion on that. Orton Gillingham has their order. However, with all my Orton Gillingham training, I've noticed, they're really not focused on the 3-year-old. That's not what they're there for. They're really more focused on elementary and up. And so when they introduce letters, they tend to introduce 5 or 6 letters at one time. If you're working with a younger child around the age of 3, I just introduce 3 letters at a time. And when Montessori introduces 3 letters at a time, what they do is they really focus on what letters are the most different, what combinations are the most different. And so we're looking at visually, are they different and do they sound different? Because the last thing we want to do is introduce letters together that look and sound similar. We don't want to do that. So in Montessori, we focus on just creating an order where the child can see the differences and hear the differences easily. Now, one thing that I have tried to accommodate because the Bob books are so popular is I try to look at, well, what letters are in that first Bob book? If that's the book that the child probably is going to read first, then maybe that is the book that I need to look at what letters are being introduced, and maybe those are the letters that I introduce first in my sandpaper letters. And so when you're looking at the different reasons why people introduce different letters at different times, any one of those can be a good reason for why you're introducing something. So all of these ideas are perfectly fine. It really comes down to what works for you, what makes sense for you. So you want to introduce about half the alphabet before the child moves on to writing. And just keep in mind when we introduce Y is introducing it as a consonant. Y as a vowel will come later. So when you introduce it the first time, introduce it as a consonant and then teach that exception later on when it's a vowel. And then as far as building alphabetical awareness with the 2.5-year-old group, really, it's all about experiencing the alphabet in a variety of ways. You can do this through circle time. You can do this through alphabet art. If you have different art experiences in your room that the child can decorate different letters and also start playing with the sounds of the letters. You can play sandpaper letter games. And when I go into my sandpaper letter lesson, when I do that presentation, I'll also go over the games that you can play with them. But also remember, the alphabet is something you can work into songs and poems and stories and different games with the names of children. Zoophonics has a song. I'm not fond of Zoophonics, but if you like that and it works for you, go for it. Sing the Zoophonics song. And then, of course, there's writing letters on a chalkboard. So all of that helps with alphabetical awareness, which is a key predictor to reading success, is understanding the alphabet, the sounds that the alphabet makes, and also recognizing letters and letter names, right? So all of that helps with learning to read. And then developing the hand for writing, because we don't want to forget that, just learning the alphabet and learning the phonics, while that's really important, that is not the only component of learning to read and write. Developing the hand for writing is really important. And in the Montessori classroom, we really develop this in several areas. So one area is the practical life area, and we might develop that through washing a table. We might develop that through sewing. We might develop that through pouring water experiences, or through baking and through reading recipes and then manipulating the teaspoons and all the different ingredients that go into the baking. So really in the practical life area, we're focused on the control and the coordination of movement and developing the hand for writing. So that's what's going on in that practical life area. And then we're also doing the same thing in the sensorial area. And I want to place extra emphasis on the rough and smooth boards because they prepare the hand for tracing the sandpapers. And so we're sensitizing the hand with the rough and smooth boards so that the child is going to be able to understand how to follow the sandpaper letters when they're introduced. Now we're also developing the pincer grip in the sensorial area with works like the knobbed cylinders and also the geometry cabinet. And the geometry cabinet has, in addition to having little knobs on on the geometrical shapes, it also has the same shapes that are going to be in the metal insets. And when the child gets the metal inset lessons, they're going to see the same shapes that they saw in the geometry cabinet. So those are really helpful for developing those pre-writing skills. And then we're going to get into handwriting and the actual official handwriting lessons for developing the hand. The first one is metal insets. And like I said, the metal insets are going to have the same shapes that the child has seen in the geometry cabinet. And then, of course, chalkboards. A blank chalkboard for the 3-year-old age group is perfect. We don't want to introduce lines at this age. So when the child is writing letters, we want to make sure and not have any lines on that blank chalkboard. They're not ready for lines yet. So just a blank chalkboard, but also offer chalk art for the child, because all of that, even if they don't want to write letters, just drawing with chalk without making letters is really important. And sometimes if a child is really resistant to writing their letters, I said, don't worry, you don't have to write your letters. Let's just draw loop-de-loops. And I'll just get out my chalk and I'll just draw loops and circles and just really focus on that movement that happens when we're writing in cursive. And so it's okay if they're not writing letters, just get them to do some of the same movements that they would do when they're doing their handwriting. So let's talk a little bit about the 4-year-olds. Now in the Montessori classroom, these are what I call my 2nd-year students. And we're going to keep working on the alphabetic knowledge and the alphabetic awareness. And this is all part of phonological awareness, a really important, really significant key predictor for reading success. And one of the things that I like to work on during this age group is sorting the consonants from the vowels. Now, Montessori does not have an official lesson on consonants and vowels. And so I think it's really important for the child to have the awareness and the language of consonants and vowels. If you're a Montessori teacher out there and you haven't given much thought to this, I would say let's think about that, because there are a lot of ways we can introduce sorting consonants from vowels and also creating a control of error. Like, okay, well, let's go see. Let's see if we got this right. And it would be really easy to check. The vowels over in the sandpaper letters and the movable alphabet are blue. So the child can check and see what they're sorting. Okay, does it go on the pink side or the blue side, right? It'd be really easy to check. So just creating different games that they can play with sorting consonants from vowels is going to be really helpful later on when we start talking about syllable lessons. Now, we also want to keep going with advanced sound games. We want to get a little bit more complex with our sound games. And something that you can do either just as a small group or as a circle time game is a guess the word game. And one of those you could do is like a syllable guess the word game. And you could say, well, I'm going to say the first part of a word, and I'm going to see if you can figure out the rest of the word. I'm going to say win. Win. And what could be the second part of that? And see if the children can figure out window, right? Or winner. Maybe they'll say winner. What about can? Candy, right? So we can go through all these different words where we only say the first part and see if the child can come up with the other part of the word. And then there's always a phoneme game that you can play. And this is one where the child has to hear all the phonemes in the word, and you're going to go really slow. I am going to sound out a word really slowly, and I'm going to see if you can figure out what word I'm saying. So let's start with the first one. K, a, t. What word did I sound out? What word was that? And see if the child can guess cat. Also continue on your rhyming games. And then of course we want to keep working on isolating words in a sentence or isolating syllables and phonemes. These are all things that you can work on, and listening for words in a sentence. Maybe you'll want to stomp your feet or jump or do something physical like that. All right, let's stomp out the words in this sentence. So that's going to help them a lot when they start to read and they start to write. And then of course we want to continue our I Spy games. And for the 4-year-old, they might be ready to start doing ending sounds. So you could say, I spy with my little eyes something that ends with the sound t. And it could be cat. So work on those ending sounds with I Spy. Now for the 4-year-olds, they're really working on their writing at this point in time. So for writing, we do this through the movable alphabet. And the movable alphabet allows the child to build words without having to worry about whether or not their hand is ready to hold a pencil, or if the child is really focused or really worried about making a mistake with the pencil. With a movable alphabet, they can just create words without having to worry about mistakes. It's easy to fix. So with the movable alphabet, we start out really simply making really simple words like mom or dad or cat or dog. Those are some of the favorite first words that the child likes to spell with the movable alphabet. And they're just really simple, short vowel words. And so that's what we work with first on the movable alphabet. And we don't do any corrections with the movable alphabet. So if a child spells something wrong, if they spell something wrong with the movable alphabet, we don't correct them. The only time we do correct the child is with the position of the letter. So let's say that they have the R backwards or the F upside down. We will correct the position of the letter to make sure the child is seeing it correctly. But when it comes to the spelling, we don't correct any of the spelling. We have a method for learning to spell in Montessori, but it does not come at the movable alphabet level. So that's something I want you to be aware of. And then as the child moves along and the child starts developing their hand more, they might just enjoy doing some labeling exercises. And usually I just have a basket of slips of paper, little pieces of paper that the child can go around the room and label different things. Or maybe I'll say, here's a rug. I want you and a friend to go around the room and collect 5 things to put on this rug, and you can write the names of them. When it comes to hand development, like I said before, we're starting to get into those metal inset lessons, and they go from very simple to very complex, and I'll show you the order of those metal insets in a different lesson. And then, of course, we still really want to work with the chalkboards. We're going to start with that blank chalkboard, like I said, and then we're going to start showing the child that they can write on one line. They can start writing simple letters or simple words on one line. And then we get into multiple lines, and I'll show you how the multiple lines work later on. And then, of course, after we've worked with the metal insets and the chalkboards, we want to get into writing on paper. Now, younger children in the Montessori classroom technically are not supposed to have erasers on their pencils. Erasers should be for our 3rd year students. And so really in Montessori, we encourage the child, if they make a mistake, either to accept the mistake or to start again on a new piece of paper. We don't want them to get caught up on their mistakes and constantly erase. So we usually reserve erasers for the kindergarten age children. And paper is going to follow the exact same steps as the blank chalkboard. And then it comes to reading. Now, this is the first formal reading lesson in the Montessori classroom. Comes after the child has already worked with the movable alphabet for a while. And with the reading, we're going to start out with phonetic reading. Those short words with the short vowel sounds, those CVC words. And we're going to start out with an exercise called Object Box 1, or the phonetic object box. And that's going to have some labels with it. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get this box, and I'm going to have all these objects inside a box. And I'm going to write a word down for the child. I'm going to have the child sound it out, and I'm going to say, all right, which one of these objects is it? Did I write down bat, hat, dog, fox? Could be any of those, or log. And so I'll write down one of the words and I'll have the child read it. Now, when I write it myself, I'm going to write in cursive. However, there's also going to be a box of labels for this so that the child doesn't need me to write it down each time. So there are a box of labels with the objects, and those labels are in print. So that's object box 1. The child is going to have a box of objects and they're going to read the labels. And then you can also work on reading with simple classified cards. Those are those 3-part cards that I talked about earlier, but this time we're going to use the control card, we're going to use the picture card, and we're going to use the label card. So you're going to use all 3 of those at this point in time. And then you can use the Bob books, right? Or simple phonetic books. Easy books for the child to read. Very short, easy books. And if the child moves through this pretty quickly, if the child is still ready for more lessons after this, you can start on phonograms, and you can start with a consonant digraph, the vowel teams, the bossy R's, the silent E's. Those are all good ones to start with. And there's also object box 2, which is just like the phonetic object box, the object box 1. It's a box of objects with labels, and the child can read the labels and associate the object. And we also have what's known as the green sandpaper letters. They're just like the sandpaper letters that the child learned before the movable alphabet, except for this time, the green sandpaper letters are all the phonograms. And if the child is still ready for more after that, you can introduce the small movable alphabet, and that is a print movable alphabet. So you have a black and a red movable alphabet, both in print, and you're going to show the child some booklets or list of words with phonograms on them. And you're going to show the child that you can spell those phonograms with one color and the rest of the word in a different color. So they start getting that visual difference between the phonogram and the phonetic parts. And then we have our 5-year-olds. This is the group of children getting ready for kindergarten. And one thing that we usually work on in that 3rd year are more advanced sound games. So this might include I spy with middle sounds. So you can say, I spy something with the middle sound ah. And it could be cat, right? And so we'll go through all those middle sounds. And then you can play different games. You can do a deletion of phonemes from a word game. That could be a little tricky, and that could be fun for a child that's really picking up on things quickly. And you could say, I'm going to say a word, and I'm going to leave out the first sound. Or you could do the ending sound, but let's leave out the first sound to start with. So I am going to say the word cat. Can you leave out the first sound in cat and see if the child can say at, right? Can they do this backwards now? Can they start thinking about it? Can they start deleting a sound and understanding what's left? And then you can do different substitution games. And substitution games really have to do with, can you change out letters in a word, like word family books? And word families I tend to find are really helpful if the child's having difficulty blending. So a word family example might be the at family, right? You have cat, sat. You're substituting the C for an S. So the ending is the same. You're just changing out. You're substituting that first letter. And sometimes when that child is having trouble blending, putting all those sounds together, I'll focus on the ending sounds, the at sound. And so the child sometimes has an easier time starting with the vowel and blending that last sound. And when that happens, we'll just focus on the middle and the ending sound, and then we'll put in the first sound. Okay, at. All right, now let's put a beginning sound on that. K, cat, at, sat. So sometimes when you do those word families and those techniques of chunking sounds together, the child has an easier time with the blending. And you can do this with a blending board, and I have a blending board that I got from Orton Gillingham, or you could just use any little stand that can hold letters, and the child can practice keeping the letters apart, sounding them out, and then pushing them together to make them come together. And you can play these games with the movable alphabet too. And then let's talk a little bit more about writing. So at this phase, the child is really starting to get into sentences. They want to be able to write something more than individual words. So you're going to start working on sentence structure. You might also be able to, in that kindergarten year, start on punctuation and capitalization. That might be another thing you can start working on. And a lot of the times, the material that we work with to do that is the story alphabet. And the story alphabet is very allows the child, it's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit easier to manipulate, so the child can have an easier time writing a story, where the movable alphabet is a little bit bigger. It's a little bit clunkier for writing sentences. So the story alphabet is just a little bit more efficient for the child. Plus also, it usually has capital letters on one side and lowercase letters on the other side of each letter card. And there's usually the inclusion of punctuations in the story alphabet box. And then of course, once the child has written out their sentences, you can say, well, let's write it on paper. And we're really going to focus on writing on those lines in the third year. And so we're going to work on that. And if the child's having trouble with their handwriting, it's okay to go back to tracing on paper and just keep practicing writing between the lines. And that is the process of writing for those third year children. And then there's reading and spelling. And of course, in reading, we really want to go into the more complex phonograms. You could do the consonant LE syllables, you can do diphthongs, you can do consonant blends. I'll go through each of these a little bit later. And then, of course, you could work on the open syllable, the long vowel sound like me or I, and show the child that the vowels can say their own name. And then, of course, we want to read phonogram books, small chapter books, and classified cards with extensions. I do have a video on the classified cards with the different extensions, so I'll drop that down below the video so that you have that. And if the child gets stuck on a word while they're trying to read, introduce the idea of finger tapping. Okay, let's sound out this word. Now, you're also going to be working on sight words or puzzle words or red words, whatever you call them. So make sure that the child knows where the sight words are and those red words are before they read it, so they can look for it. But then if it's just a word that they can sound out, let's put that word on our fingers. Let's put the word hat on our fingers. Let's sound that out. And you can tap that out on your fingers, and that helps them isolate those sounds, and then they blend it back together when they're reading a word that they don't know in a book. And then for spelling, like I was saying before, the small movable alphabet is where we start getting into spelling. And so we have the black letters and we have the red letters. And we're going to write our phonogram in red and the phonetic part in black. And if the child is given a list of words, and we're going to read through them. Let's read fish and shell, and we'll read the whole list of words. And then I'm going to turn the card over and I'm going to say, all right, what is the first word you remember from this? And the child is going to write the first word they can remember. And then I'm going to say, okay, what other words can you remember from this? And so the child will write as many of the words as they can. And then I'm not going to correct any spelling errors, but what the child is going to do, we're going to flip over the card after the child has spelled as many words as they can spell, and they're going to correct their own work. So they're going to compare their work to the card, and then if they made any mistakes, they're going to correct their mistakes by looking at that card. Now, for sight words, when it comes to those sight words, red words, puzzle words, whatever you call them, one way that I like to learn to spell is through arm tapping, and we'll spell it out on our arm as we tap. And so that just gives the child some movement as they're spelling. And then, of course, we're going to do word exploration. We're going to work on compound words, masculine and feminine words, synonyms, homonyms, antonyms. We're going to show the child what all of those types of words are through different activities. And then we're going to get into grammar. And we do this in the kindergarten environment in Montessori through the sensorial impression of grammar. And by that, I mean the child is going to experience the grammar concept. And we're going to do that, first of all, through an activity. And then we're also going to learn to recognize grammar concepts in association with a different symbol. So I'll get into more of that as we go along. I'm going to do lesson presentations on how we do grammar in Montessori. So once we give the child a experience of the grammar concept, let's say an experience of the adjective or an experience of the verb, we're going to show them the symbol that goes with it. And then we're going to include a process where the child reads the words that have been given. They experience the grammar concept. They symbolize the grammar concept. And then we're going to transpose, which is we're going to mix up all the words that we just put together. And we're going to say, does that make sense? Because we really want the child to think of word order. The order of words is important. It has to make sense, right? So we want the child to think about that. And we do that through transposition. And then at the end, we reset everything so that it makes sense to the child again. So that is how we introduce grammar in the Montessori environment. Like I said, I'm going to get more into that as we go along. And we also introduce sentence analysis in the kindergarten environment. We start very simply with one subject, one action. And then it starts to get more complicated. We start adding on objects, and we start adding on punctuation like commas, and we start adding on more subjects, more objects, and even prepositional phrases. And so we get into some very complex diagrams as we go along in the kindergarten environment. And then when they get into elementary, they start teaching the grammar and the sentence analysis more directly. In kindergarten, we're really still focused on the sensorial impression, that experience, not so much on using the word, article, noun, adjective, verb. we're really more focused on that experience of grammar. But in elementary, they're really going to focus on using those labels and understanding the concept of those labels in the sentence analysis or in the grammar lesson itself. So that is just an overview of the activities broken down into the first year group, second year group, and third year group in the Montessori environment. And as always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.